Did you know that what didn't happen to you in childhood can be just as damaging as what did? I'm talking today about childhood emotional neglect. And this is a term that was coined by Dr. Janice Webb, I think about 15 years ago. And we're talking about what happens when what is missing has just as much of a negative impact on you as an adult as if you had been hit or yelled at, etc. And childhood emotional neglect can be really hard to pinpoint and understand. You might feel like nothing really happened to you, but you have a strong sense that something isn't right. This is a good sign that it's CEN that you're dealing with. So I'm going to talk today about three signs that it's CEN at play and seven kind of symptoms or seven outcomes of an adult who grew up with childhood emotional neglect. Let's get started. Number one is a lack of support. So there's just a sense that anytime you needed support for your emotions or some kind of comfort around how you were feeling, you just never received that. There was nowhere for you to go, no one to talk to when you were going through something hard. And so, anytime you did try to talk about something emotional, something you needed help with, you probably ended up feeling worse. And you may have learned pretty quickly that my parents and my family aren't the people I can go to for help with anything I'm feeling. I'm all alone with my feelings. And this, of course, can be very isolating and have a lot of ramifications down the road, which we're going to talk about. Number two is a lack of affection. So, just a lack of physical comfort. If you got hurt or if you just needed a hug, it just wasn't there. And instead of kind words or loving glances, if you're a parent, you might have the experience like I do of kind of lighting up when your child enters the room. As a child with CEN, you would not have experienced that. You might have experienced the opposite, where you got the sense that your presence was not wanted, that you were a burden, and that may have been said with silence. There are ways people can show that they really don't like having you around, and that's part of it too. You might have received criticism, contempt, or just like a stony glare. And this is what Pete Walker calls negative noticing. The third one is feeling invisible. So if we have a lack of support, a lack of affection, and we might call this a lack of attention. So just the feeling like you don't matter. And I can attest to when I was doing my 2 decades of trying to get therapy, not doing very well with it, but I was making my efforts. I had a therapist who actually asked me to say the words "you matter" or "I matter." And I literally couldn't say them because it was just so far removed from my experience. I'd been told without words all my life, sometimes with words, but not in those specific words, that I don't matter at all, that what I want doesn't matter. In fact, I need to give up what I want so someone else can have what they want. And this was kind of the narrative in my head with regard to myself. So I literally could not say the words "I matter." And now I find that hard to believe. That's like a different person to me now because I've undergone such a transformation. But it was true. I know it's true. And then she asked me to write it down, and I still couldn't do it. Finally, I could write it with my non-dominant hand. That was the only way I could do it. And I'm so glad that that has changed. They might also refuse to acknowledge your achievements. So, for example, if you won a lot of awards or got really good grades, they might even talk to other people about it, but you never heard anything about that. You might watch your friends getting taken out for dinner when they get into university or, getting a reward if they win something at school or if they win a game or whatever it is, at least a pat on the back, and you never got that. And I'm thinking of myself never receiving any praise for being the honor roll student and so on, but I did hear my narcissistic mother telling other people about it. And then really big things like ballet exams, getting the highest marks. Never heard a thing about that. The grade eight, I got the French award in the whole school. I was the top French student. Never heard a word about that. And my parents were there at the ceremony, so they saw me get that award, not a word. And the only thing I had to prove to me, because it can really play with your sense of reality, you start to question whether you're even real in a way, or at the very least, have these things really happened to me? Because when I got into university, my friend who also got into her chosen school, her parents let her have a glass of champagne, even though we were still 18. They took her out for dinner. They made this big deal about it. And then I remember she was actually at my house when I got my letter, because we're going back to the early 90s, so we're still getting mail. And it was a letter in the mail of acceptance from my number one school. And my father happened to walk in the door at the same time, and my friend was there. And I remember thinking, I don't want to tell him because I know I'm going to be embarrassed in front of my friend because he's not going to respond. But I kind of felt like she was there, so I have to do it. And so she's going to think I'm weird or whatever if I don't. And so I just said to him really quietly, and I think I was even like down on the ground for some reason. I don't know why. I just have this image of that. Maybe it's just an image in my head of how I felt. But I just said really quietly, "Oh, Dad, I got into U of T." And he just kept walking. He didn't even break stride. And he just kind of said, "Oh, great." And he didn't seem happy at all. And I remember my friend just looking shocked. And she said, he didn't sound very happy for you. And I just kind of brushed it off. Just let's get off this topic and on to something else. But just an example. And, I had the letter of recommendation or the letter of acceptance. I had the little award, the little badge we got in ballet for the exam. I had my little French award, which was a little circle. So I could look at these things and know that I had achieved these things, but those were the only evidence. And so sometimes I would take them out and just look at them and hold them as proof that I had actually done these things, because that was the only proof I had. So we're going to move on now, and there's many other signs. These are just three, but we're going to move on now to some of the symptoms, so how this shows up for us later in life. And the first is that you have trouble regulating your emotions. And because you didn't have support around your emotions, this makes a lot of sense. Your emotions are scary to you, so you're either going to try to avoid them, or you're going to be very shut down, or you'll find that you push them down. And then at some point, maybe because you drank too much or something happened to kind of, loosen the gears a bit and lower the inhibitions, and you lash out. And so this is the suppressed emotions trying to find an outlet, but it's what we call a trigger. And so you're responding in an outsized way to something that is not the actual source of the trigger. So this is emotional dysregulation. The second is that you might be uncomfortable with affection, and this is because you didn't receive enough of it. It feels very foreign to you, maybe unsafe, and you don't do very well giving or receiving hugs, kisses, what have you, and in a non-sexual manner, I mean. And this is the result of you just not getting that. So it doesn't feel normal to you to exchange that with another person. You have a low sense of self-worth because you were treated like you don't matter. And when you're treated like you don't matter, or like you're a burden to the people who are supposed to love you most, of course, this is going to affect how you feel about yourself. And you're going to feel like you have to give to other people just to have a right to kind of exist. You might be apologizing for taking up any kind of space, that kind of thing. You feel isolated and alone, and some people say it is the feeling of pressing your face against the glass and looking in from the outside, regardless of the situation that you're in. You have a lot of trouble finding comfort in the presence of other people. So, healthy people will find their friends and family like this soft place to fall, the place where they can really relax. But you never have that feeling. You rarely, if ever, feel like I can just sink into this person or these people. I can really be myself. Regardless of whether you are alone or with others, you are going to feel isolated. And of course, that comes from that emotional neglect where you had to handle everything you felt on your own. You weren't free to talk to other people about it. So this is an outcome of that. You feel like there's something wrong with you, like you have a fatal flaw, or that you're very unlovable in a way that other people aren't, and you're way too hard on yourself. So you might let other people get away with things. You might give other people some room to make mistakes and so on, but you don't do that for yourself. Number seven is that you have relationship struggles, and this results from the insecure attachment style that comes from the lack of bonding with the primary caregivers. And so this can look like an avoidant attachment style, which is just what it sounds like. You're avoiding intimacy, you're avoiding emotions because they're too scary, or an anxious attachment style, which is kind of the opposite. You're too needy, you're too clingy, you need constant reassurance from other people. And you could also have a disorganized attachment, which is sort of like a combination of the two, but there's a certain way it has to show up. So, because sometimes people can show anxious at some times and avoidant at others, but it doesn't mean they're disorganized. Disorganized is quite rare, and it comes when your primary caregiver was a source of fear instead of a source of comfort. And in fact, it was like the person you went to for comfort, but you were also afraid of them. So you can see how this was like a push-pull, and that push-pull continues on. So in a relationship, it might look like hot and cold, like come here, go away, but it would be even in the same interaction, like in very close succession rather than two separate events. That's the best way I can describe that. And I had a disorganized attachment style before I healed, and I've heard that it is only about 5% of people have it, and it does come from when your caregiver is a source of fear. So pretty severe abuse going on when you have that kind of attachment style. So now how do we overcome childhood emotional neglect? We're adults now. We know what's going on. We've named it. What do we do to kind of heal it? The first one is to recognize what's going on. And with this video, I hope I've helped you to do that. The second one is to connect with your body. So with emotional neglect, you have, as a survival skill, probably become very detached from yourself. So you might not know what you're feeling inside. You might not be able to connect with yourself. And in order to protect yourself, you would have disconnected from that. So instead, it's time to tune into yourself, turn in a healthy way. And you can do things like I suggest setting a timer throughout the day to just check in with yourself. What am I feeling? What do I need? What can I give myself to serve that need? And it might just be hunger or having to go to the bathroom or needing a rest or whatever that is. And number two or number three is to befriend your emotions. And that might sound really difficult because it's not something that was safe to do in the past. But I would suggest using something called mindful self-compassion. And this is a modality developed and researched by Dr. Kristen Neff. And it is a three-pronged approach to self-care. It's a little deeper than what we think of self-care. And part of it is to allow your emotions to arise without judging them. So mindfulness is accepting whatever is without judging it. And that's all you're going to do with your feelings. You're not going to try to fix them. You're going to stop saying, I shouldn't feel that way. You're going to allow yourself to feel the things that have been so scary to you. And you can use something else like EFT tapping. And if you don't know what that is, you can search it up right here on YouTube. Lots of places to find examples of EFT tapping that will regulate your nervous system, again, helping you connect with your body while you process these very dense emotions. And what that will do is it will take what feels unmanageable to you, such as a so-called negative emotion, which, by the way, there are no negative emotions. That's part of the acceptance here. They are just feelings and they are here to give you information. They are our friends, even though it might not feel like that right now. So you are going to use tapping and self-compassion to allow those emotions to exist essentially without pushing them away or pushing them down and regulating your nervous system at the same time. So this will stop you from wanting to run away from the emotions, which doesn't help us, and allow you to be with them without resisting them. Because as they say, what we resist persists, and you're not going to be able to process an emotion that you're trying to get rid of. The next one is to reparent your inner child. And the neglected child that you were becomes the child inside you as an adult. And that child still needs care and attention. And since it didn't get it from the primary caregivers where it was supposed to, now it's your job as an adult to give that child care and attention. Because most of the time, that child inside us, we are annoyed with it. We are wishing it wasn't there because the child inside you is the one that protects you through self-sabotage. So when we're doing things that are bad for us, we don't know why. That is the inner child's way of protecting you because those kind of primitive protective mechanisms actually did work in childhood. One example is not having boundaries. So that did keep you safe from a scary caregiver in childhood. But now as an adult, it's holding you back. And there's many more examples of those self-defeating behaviors that the inner child uses. So basically, these are short-term strategies for survival that the inner child is using, but they hurt you in the long run. That's a kind of simple way to know what it is. So until that inner child gets the validation and the soothing and the love and the care that it needs, it's going to keep on trying to get your attention. It's going to keep on trying to protect you in these maladaptive ways. So now you want to not only comfort the child, but thank it for all that it's done for you so far and help it to understand that you are in the driver's seat now. You are the grown up now. You have the resources or the access to resources to get help if you need it. You can talk to people now. You can reach out. You're not trapped by yourself like you were as a child. So it needs to know all that. So you can even talk to your inner child. I still do it sometimes. The inner child, for example, might be the one who prevents you from going out because it's a little bit uncomfortable or even a little bit scary. But in the long run, that's going to be better for you because you're going to meet people and build relationships and all of that. But in the very short term, staying home feels a lot safer. That's a small example. And one thing I'd like to say in closing is that I want to take away any shame about this as you heal from it. And I don't want you to feel like it's your responsibility to heal. So when I say you're the adult now and it's your job to heal your inner child, I want you to do that without a feeling like, oh, this is another thing I have to do. Because there are so many things as survivors of childhood emotional neglect that we were responsible for. We were often parentified, and we were just expected to grow up and take care of ourselves and our own emotions and whatever we were going through. And now this might feel like yet another thing I have to take care of that is actually not something I should have to take care of. And that's true. And so instead of saying it's your responsibility to heal yourself, which a lot of people say, and which I've never liked. In the past, I actually found that a little bit triggering and it made me very resistant to it. So what I say instead now is that you love yourself enough to do this work of healing your inner child. You know, you are deserving of a healed inner child and a competent adult in the driver's seat. You know, it is the most loving form of self-care for me to heal my inner child rather than my responsibility. So I hope that helps. If you've enjoyed this video, I encourage you to subscribe and have a look at the other ones to get even more depth on this topic of growing up in a dysfunctional home, especially with a narcissistic mother. So thank you again for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.